Yeah, hi there everybody on YouTube. Uh, it's Wednesday morning, 22nd of July 2009, and as we previously mentioned in a couple of little snips before this, Ireland is now the most indebted nation in the world. And if you base that on any of the normal two parameters, if you base it the national debt against GDP or the national debt against the number of citizens, each of our citizenry owes here $450,000. That's correct, nearly $500,000. Every citizen in this republic owes as part of our national debt to the rest of the world. That's approximately €325,000 for every man, woman and child on this little country of ours. Now, one of the obvious questions is, how did this happen? And possibly also why did it happen? But the main thing is let's address the less sinister one of them. How did this happen? Well, this happened over the last 12 years, because 12 years ago our national debt was $11 billion US, which is quite tiny, quite small and very controllable. And it's ended up in a situation where it's $1.8 trillion today, because essentially, well, several things, but at its core lies the concept of too big to fail. And inside that is the concept of sovereignty. And where does political power lie in this state? The Irish view themselves as part of Europe from a political and economic point of view, but from a social point of view, they're connected to America. They view themselves as the 51st state of America. Now, that's come about because we have a lot of first and second generation Irish people who lived here, and because of the political and economic circumstances, left this country and went to America. And what we've done is we have tried to embrace the European model and also the American model from an economic point of view, from an economic standpoint of view. And in embracing the two, the American model has constantly won over. And we've ended up in this situation of this huge debt, this huge indebtedness, as I say, because our government, we've had the same government essentially for the last 10 or 12 years, and the people who run that government at best have been incompetent, and at worst have engaged in some sort of a gigantic criminal conspiracy. Now, if you're to believe the first case, that they're just totally incompetent, then they should be thrown out. But to get back to how this came about, we have to understand we had a government, a political entity called a government, which was imbued by the will, put into place by the will of the Irish people. We give them, the Irish citizenry give them the sovereignty to rule over us. They didn't give it to any banks or corporations or anything else. So there's this dichotomy, there's this strain constantly going on in modern capitalist politics and capitalist economics, where you have the body politic, which has the sovereignty and the will of the Irish people imbued in it, and you have all these corporations which are supposed to be in the private sector, but they've more economic power, more real power in a real sense than the state has. And what has happened in Ireland over the last 10 or 12 years, these key people in Irish society who run these banks and large corporations have these politicians in their back pocket. And we saw that with one of our prime ministers who was forced to resign, a fellow called Bertie Ahern, a minister of finance who didn't have a bank account, who hid his money in a wall safe. He was a minister of finance and he didn't have a bank account. We also, his main acolyte, he was in charge, he was the captain on the ship, he was Captain Smith of the Titanic, Ireland being the pseudonym for the Titanic. And his first officer for 5.5 years, 6 years of that voyage that Ireland took was this present Taoiseach, Brian Cowan. These two men together led us to this point in time, and we still have this man who was in charge, who was our Chancellor, in charge of our finances for the last 6 years. He's now the man who's leading us and telling us that he has the wherewithal to get us out of this dilemma. He's the man who led us into it, and he's now telling us that he's going to get us out of it. At the end of the day, this is really about one thing and about one thing only. They let these corporations get to the size that they were. They let these banking corporations, they turned a blind eye to what they were about. They turned a blind eye to the fact that they were gambling on not just property, but on the forex markets, on the equity markets, on every aspect of the capitalist model. They were involved in high risk gambling. And what happened? The Chinese burst the bubble. Poof. And the Americans, of course, with their property market. But essentially the Chinese burst the bubble. And what's happened is now we're all here to pick up the pieces. But at the end of the day, we have to remember, where does the sovereignty lie? Does the sovereignty lie with the state, with the people that we elect, or does it lie with the giant corporations and the giant banks? And our government has said it's with the corporations and the banks.